President Trump spoke to the World Economic Forum in Davos yesterday, where he warned that tariffs are coming.
My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff.
Joining us now to discuss the budget, taxes, and more is Committee for Responsible Federal Budget President Maya MacGuineas. Maya, it's good to have you on. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. The president, of course, also did start off by mentioning all of the federal debt that had built up over the past few years under his predecessor. But, of course, that's kind of the glide path we're on in terms of deficits. A lot of talk of narrowing the fiscal deficit relative to the size of the economy. But what are you picking up in terms of policy priorities out of all of this noise that might actually be pointed in that direction?
I think we're actually picking up two different messages. So one is the president is absolutely right, as is his likely Secretary of Treasury, to point out that the deficit situation is out of control, that just structurally, even if nothing else happens, we're on course to borrow another $22 trillion over the coming decade, right? This is a problem that is widening. Within 4 years, we'll hit the record of debt as a share of GDP. The last time we were that high was just after World War II. Every warning signal that there could be is warning us that the structural fiscal situation is unsustainable and starting to become an immediate threat. On the other hand, if you look at all the promises that have been made out of the president during the election, what the president has been talking about, the real risk here is that the policies that are adopted by Congress will make the situation worse, not better. President Trump made a number of promises on the campaign, both in terms of spending increases and tax cuts, and Congress is really out of the habit of paying for things. So if I were betting, I would say the next 4 years, while I expect growth to be strong, I think the fiscal situation will continue to deteriorate in terms of the policies we're passing. That's what's going to have to change.
Right. So you have the promises, as you say, of not really touching the very largest budget items out there in any material way. At the same time, there's this Department of Government Efficiency that is getting a lot of attention and maybe throwing out a lot of proposals. But it seems as if it's operating really around the edges of the federal budget.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an incredible promise for what DOGE could do. It is definitely shifting now so that it's going to focus more on technological innovation and improving the efficiencies in the agencies, how the bureaucracy functions. All of those things are desperately needed. But what is also desperately needed is actual budgetary savings. And as you just pointed out, we have basically every politician tripping over themselves to promise not to fix the two biggest problems in our budget, Social Security and Medicare, both of which have trust funds that will be insolvent in roughly a decade. And if that happens, that puts the seniors who depend on those programs massively at risk. It leaves them incredibly vulnerable. But nobody's talking about how to fix them. Even if you don't look at that, there's still very significant budgetary savings to be had. And I wish that were part of the DOGE agenda. Initially, I thought it was going to be. So I think the part they're focusing on, tremendous for growth. But there's a lot of savings to be found in the budget. We should be focusing on that as well, using that to offset every piece of legislation. Lawmakers right now should be in agreement that no matter what the legislation they're passing should not increase the debt. And that goes for when they. Yeah.
But we haven't heard any real offsets yet. And extending these tax cuts will be around a $4 trillion addition to the deficit. Do you think when you look at how they're going to perhaps use the magic of Washington accounting to this, is it possible they say, well, because it's not a change in current tax policy, therefore it's not additional to the deficit and the debt? Or could they do something like extend it only for 6 or 8 years and therefore decrease the nominal cost of it to the deficit? So what do you see on the accounting side that they could use instead of real offsets?
I see a whole lot of potential budgetary gimmicks, many of which you just mentioned. So there are a number of members of Congress who are talking about real offsets, and those are actual policy choices, the kinds of trade-offs we haven't dealt with in decades, basically, because we don't budget anymore. But with every offset that comes to light, changes you could make in Medicaid and Medicare, executive orders that we could alter, you will have a strong constituency fighting against it. So I definitely worry that the real risk is that the cost of that tax bill will be bid up and that the offsets will be bid down. They should have a reconciliation number that is zero, adding zero to the debt, preferably something that would reduce the deficit. But they are likely to do what you're talking about, which is switching from a current law baseline, which recognizes that the tax cuts are supposed to expire, and it just pretends they're extended and that there's no cost. But even if you pretend that, you still have to borrow the money. They will have heroic economic growth assumptions, which will be much higher than likely to be that will actually materialize. And I think where you mentioned last may be where they will land, which is I worry, and I think it's possible those tax cuts will be temporary. The reason I worry about that is that's not no way to make tax policy. Permanency is really important for planning.
It's what they did the last time.
Yes, it is. Right. That's why we're here.